as they
Well, I
fight.
mean, I know these are kind of big questions, but I'm having fun. Like the I mean, look, I'm somebody I try my best to be optimistic. I always say that like I'm a socialist, so I think that's a very optimistic philosophy actually, because you're like, shit's really bad, we can do some shit that's really good. Um, but I mean, like the future probably looks like a prolonged period of really vicious intercapitalist class competition. You know, for being whatever the industry that takes advantage of whatever political solutions they try to do in regards to like the tech industry, the profitability crisis. Like, there's somebody who gets a little corner and then they fight with everybody else, right?
Mm, yeah.
And that we're just like, sitting and strapping ourselves in for like another couple decades of new towns or whatever locales being the bad guys.
Mm. Yeah, no, I mean, there's like the intercapitalist rivalry within the United States, and then there's of course the way that that expresses itself on the international stage, which is international competition between national bourgeoisies, as we see, of course, in Russia, a
Yeah.
certain state capitalist model and a national bourgeoisie and a ruling class, which takes seriously the imperatives to grow in a territorial fashion, let's just call it, and
Mhm.
also to, of course, the lining up now of like the West versus the rest, multipolar world, in this case, meaning like a bipolar world with two rough models, and a deglobalization process, or at least as we see right now, a disglobalization process, where all the shit that the three of us grew up, Bill Clinton and George W. Bush and Obama, it's all about free trade and free markets and free people and whatever and trade deals. There's a real like world historic reason why that's going into reverse. And Russia, Ukraine is this what seems to be the first expression of
Mm.
a Cold War part two, or don't everybody freak out, but like World War III. That doesn't mean that it's going to be nuclear, but it could mean a series of like proxy wars that are breaking out all over the world between two different models of capitalist development. And so we have the conflicts that exist on like a national stage within the capitalist class, within sectors. And you see that in our politics. You have like the extractive sector, which is tied largely to Republicans with oil and gas
Mhm.
and mining and all that shit on the one hand. And then you have the green tech capitalists who are largely lined up with the Democratic Party. That's going to work itself out on the national political stage. Hopefully peacefully. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how peaceful it's going to be in the medium term, but maybe more peaceful than what could happen out on the international realm, which of course is like the real big stakes where national capitals start to confront one another over access to markets and access to resources which are getting scarce. So if I sound like a doomer, I'm sorry. I feel like we're in a kind of a doomer moment right now, but I think we have cause to be optimistic. I think you're right that calling oneself a socialist is already a step of optimism. It's just that for me and my politics, and I think you guys probably too, and probably a lot of the people that watch here, we know anymore that the two-party system is not going to work for us.
Totally.
We also know that throwing up Ralph Nader or Jimmy Dore as like a third party candidate isn't going to do the thing. We have a sense that like bourgeois politics in this country in general are sort of broken. We saw a strike wave last year that people got really hyped and excited about. Didn't really create any new institutions. So it seems
Mhm.
like the labor relations regime in this country is sort of also broken as well. So we need to start thinking systematically about what is the social subject that exists in our country, the broad social subject that, given organization and given the ability to wield autonomous power, might actually be able to, if not leverage, then maybe even overthrow these very forces that are making all of our lives total shit right now
I
and
mean,
threatening the planet right now.
I think like we're in a rough moment because like look, I was somebody who was very much all in for Bernie. I thought the Bernie moment was really great. But one thing that's like been really frustrating for me, I think, like if we want to call it post Bernie, right, is that like all the lessons like you use the word like institution building, right? Like all the lessons that we learned from that moment aren't what people are learning. It's like a constant campaign mindset, right? Which like if only we had done like this trick or that trick or marketed the ideas in this way, and we could have changed this mind or that mind. And it's like no, the structural impediments that we were up against, like with the Bernie movement itself, right? Like Bernie in his fairness would always say like, it's not me, us. Like, if I get in power, y'all got to do a lot of shit. And everyone was like, oh, it's so nice Bernie's like thinking about me.
Yeah, yeah, it's like the MVP, like shouting out his teammates.
Y'all are the real heroes. Yeah, exactly.
That's me.
What are you
I
saying?
needed
Like,
you guys in
like,
the crowd too.
This state apparatus that is going to completely crush any of the like the mild reforms I'm trying to put forward.
Yeah.
And like I think one thing that is like, as not to contradict myself, is saying like I have optimism. Like the thing that's really frustrating for me is this like all these kind of like trick shot politics, right? That we're going to get like, maybe we can have like a comedian up there who's just able to speak truth to power, and like we can get everyone together. And as you're saying that, like, I think it's true even with the Democrats, right? And this isn't letting them off, right? But it's recognizing that like there's all this talk like, oh, the Democrats lost their soul or like they lost their heart. And it's like, no, they are like operatives in this like bourgeois capital system that has very like, clear constraints. I mean, a great example of this is Joe Biden, right? Like, what's he doing at the border right now? He is doing Trump policy at the border. And the political difference is that Trump is like, this is great, we're going to stop them from coming in. And Biden is quiet about it. He's like, we've created a new app that can't read the color skin of black people.
Right.
Than me. Right.
We worked with our partners in Silicon Valley to make an anti-racist deportation app.
And it's like the point is not saying that these people aren't cynical, but like if your takeaway from the crisis that we're in is like all the people in power are cynical, right, and like have bad hearts or worship the wrong religion, like you're missing the kind of structural impediments that are creating the crisis that we're in. I don't know. It's frustrating for me right now because I think that like the left or whatever you want to call it, like the socialists and the Marxists and the progressives are trying to figure out what to do. And I think that it's worthwhile to like participate in politics and try to build a movement. But I think particularly like the socialist DSA adjacent folks, like there's no real plan other than trying to see if we can sort of revive
New Deal.
Revive unions. I mean, like again, like I'm all for unions. Like unions are great. We need more of them, right? But like again, like this is where you can be too American centric, right? You can say like, oh, America has union decline, and that's why things are bad. It's like, well, this is like a very coherent and clear. This is something that's happening all across the board in many different contexts of countries that have strong unionization, maybe even have like a socialist or a social democratic party in parliament or whatever, right? Like this is a fundamental crisis of the system that we're living in versus, something that's like, oh, for too long we've let corrupt politicians control the system. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was our late great friend Michael Brooks who was like early and often a critic of anti-corruption politics, right? And he was really good on that stuff. He was out there before I think a lot of us were, pointing to the fact that corruption is really, in many cases, a cop-out, and anti-corruption politics always serves some other sort of interest, And so when on the left and the right in this country, which is to say, in very real terms, the Republican and the Democratic Party, because when, with all due respect to our DSA friends out there, you may be DSA members, and I know many, many great DSA members, the DSA has managed to, and maybe this was overdetermined, but they've managed to set themselves up where they're sort of an adjunct either mostly to the Democratic Party, the left wing of the Democratic Party, or to the extent that there is like a labor policy within the DSA, it's not as much a rank and file strategy, but more of like, let's become staffers, let's become the good non-corrupt union officials within the current union structure.
What do you think, though? Sorry, not to cut you off, but like, what do you think about some of the more like reform candidates within the labor movement? I'm not talking about politics. I'm talking about like UAW.
Oh yeah,
some of these moves.
The UAW shit is amazing to see. One person, one vote. That was something that was fought for many, many, many years. With the UAW declining by like 2/3 over the last decades, it's so it might be a little late, a little too late, a little too
And what
short
was
or whatever.
interesting, you know, is like when you're looking at the vote totals too, it's like a lot of them were closed shops that were going
Mm.
for the reform, which I don't know makes a lot of sense, but yeah.
There's a whole other big discussion we could have about labor in this country. Like, if I could do a shameless plug, I did a
Yeah.
huge episode on this a couple months ago with Matt Crispin from Chapo Trap House, and I spent a lot of time thinking about the union question because, in case you hadn't guessed, you know, I'm in
Yeah.
one myself, and you know, there is a deep history to the American labor movement, and I feel like there's a credulousness that I've even had in the past, and I think a lot of people on the left have, towards the particular sort of legal and institutional structures of unions in this country as they've developed and degenerated over the last 50 or 60 years or so. And so, if you listen to the episode, what I basically argue at the end is that we have a system, labor relations system in this country that by design takes power away from the shop floor, that by design ties labor institutions in this country to the state in a way
Mhm.
that's very, very, very detrimental towards what I think is, if I could just have one headline, like 2 words or 3 words, it would be working class autonomy. Like what we need. And, you know, if you look at France right now, which is in its like 5th day of general
Yeah.
strike, right? This powerful working class that they have in that country, their unionization rate is lower than the
I was
United
about to say,
States.
yeah.
And how do they pull that off? It's that, well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for it. They have a lot more socialists is one of them, right? But they also have a whole different sort of legal and system of institutional um, labor unions in their country, where a small minority in a workplace can wield massive power. And where like democracy at work is actually taken fucking seriously, and the political strike is something that's seen as not just a right but a freedom of all workers to have. And so we spend a lot of time in this country talking about labor rights, such as they're enumerated by the
Mhm.
1935 National Labor Relations Act, or the Wagner Act. Then, of course, undermined by Taft Hartley, blah, blah, blah. We spend a lot of time, but if you look about it in comparative perspective with other countries and other time periods, I feel like, and this is a crazy thing to say, but we need to start thinking and acting as though labor law doesn't exist in this country, because they can't fucking fire us all. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned. Evan Bowman in chat is saying one. I'm in a great. I thought you were saying one big union, but you know, the IWW has some inspirational stuff about it. What the Communist Party was doing in the
Mhm.
1930s is very inspirational. The rank and file wildcat upsurge, especially in the public sector and among black workers in the 1960s and 1970s, is a really, really important history. But we need to pair that with a deeply critical analysis of what labor has been and what it has become in this country, which is a bit of a trap. It's a trap to tie you to a politics that's dying and dead. It's a trap to take all the energies of solidarity and collective action and put them into a system which grinds down working class initiative and working class autonomy. And so the question, what do you do with that, is a huge one. And I have some ideas about it, right? But I beg people on the economy stuff not to look at things in terms of corrupt politicians or look
Yeah.
at bad political decisions. Instead, look at it in terms of capitalism. And when it comes to the labor question in this country, which is up for grabs again, I beg people to look at it in a more systemic Marxist fashion, understanding the class struggle, understanding the way in which when we are offered a legal union in this country, are offered handcuffs, and look at ways in which we can work outside of that framework.
I mean, we've been doing a lot of Rosa Luxemburg on the show recently, and
Oh
like,
yeah.
in her text, like Reform and Revolution, she really like lines this out, and like, like at least for me, you speak how you want, but like I try to find a balance here because like I think it's very important to like be able to try to fight for higher rates of unionization in this country. So this is not like an encouragement to like reject, like I don't know if I'm sure you are, but the World Socialist website people who just like go
Mm.
and they cause a lot of trouble.
They're doing great fucking work. They're reporting on the ground like nobody else on the so-called left, they were on the ground at the Caterpillar factory as they went on strike. They
Well,
were calling for an international rank and file committee of workers.
they're
you know?
impressive because they do show up, and I always give them that. But like I know for my
But
friends,
they're also fucking wingnuts.
yeah, no, because the problem is like no, like, but at the same time, it's like here's the lesson to take from that, right? It's like that, like, well, if they're able to do that, I don't know even know how many members they have or what kind of whatever. Like, if they're able to do that, like, we absolutely need to find a way to be able to do that.
For
But
sure.
I was gonna say, like, in the big strike in Bama at where Matt Cole, like, they did a lot of damage. To like the socialist movement because a lot of they were showing up and they were causing trouble, and these guys who are like picketing for their lives are being harassed by some weird guy from Detroit, Chicago or whatever, right? It's just like you got to be normal. I think is just a general lesson to take.
Yeah.
But like, anyways, I guess what I'm trying to say is that like there's like these two sides. It's like you want to see those strikes be successful, you want to see the union movement be successful, but you also have to be able to have the two-track mindset is that like we also need a lot of reform in the labor movement and changes in the labor movement in this country, right? And it can be tough because like you're on this like level of historic defeat where like so many people don't think that being in a union or fighting for a union or building a union is a possibility for them, right?
People like the idea of unions. Like if you look at the positives
Yeah.
on that for surveys, it's like up in the 60s or the 70s. What they don't seem to want is as union for themselves or to fight for one themselves, which is a reflection of, and this is like a broader context, not just labor unions, but also the politics shit that we were talking about earlier, which is a sort of like death of mass politics and sort of mass popular movements, not just in America, but across the West. The only place where it's kind of still alive is in China, actually, which has a highly militant and mobilized working class. But that's kind of because they're on a separate phase of capitalist development from the one that we're on. And they have their own radical militant traditions over there. But like, a question I would pose to all of us, and it's one that I have an answer for myself, but I would pose it to you and to everybody there. When do we stop doing defensism? When do we stop joining in a popular front with people who are always going to stab us in the back and ultimately make things for us and the people that we care about worse in the long run? When are we constantly going to stop crying about the threats coming from the right, the possibility that the Supreme Court, which has always been reactionary, except for like a 20, 30-year period in this country, maybe 40-year period, is going to take away our union rights? There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of sense that we're oppressed and that we're all victims, which we are in a very real and like profound sense. We are victimized. But also, at the same time, instead of talking about grabbing our rights back, we can start talking about expressing our freedoms. And instead of talking about ourselves as, wages have been going down, we're being squeezed more and more by capital, we're being victimized by circumstances, we can instead just start to say, what is the latent power that we have? What would it look like for us to take our things that we work with, the tools and the machines that we work with every day, or the shops or the establishments that we work in and day out? What would it mean for us to take those under our control? What would it look like for us to survey the city that we live in or the small town that we live in and say, how would we make this good if we were the ones that were actually in charge of doing this, the masses of people in this country? We need to start thinking of ourselves instead of as victims of circumstances or victims of this nasty, greedy capitalist class. Instead, start thinking about ourselves as potentially powerful and working together to find ways in which we can utilize and start wielding that power. Because certainly begging, one spectrum of the capitalist class and its fucking lackeys to give us a little more or protect us from the next fucking assault from the right wing or whatever, just fundamentally isn't working. And everybody fucking knows that. So let's just start saying, you know what, if they're going to take us off the fucking cliff, then let's go. Let's see what's on the other side. If the Supreme Court's going to take away the Wagner Act, then fucking what are we going to do about it? We might as well just start fighting in these new conditions. And conditions are changing very quickly. You see this over the last few years. You see this with these bank failures, which all of this debt crisis shit started abroad. Like me and Derek Varn were looking at this shit happening in Sri Lanka. We were looking at it in East Africa. We were looking at it happening in Pakistan. We were like, wow, look at what the Fed raising rates and this crisis of capitalist production is doing abroad. A few months later, boom, that's bounced right back into our country, and our country's kind of like hanging by a thread right now. What it looks like on the other side of that is probably scary, but I would beg people to also think about the potentials.
I mean, I like certainly like agree with the challenge. I mean, I would say on that, it's just like this is why, like for me, like doing this politics talking is gets really depressing. I get really bored. Like I just don't give a shit about a lot of things. The only two questions that I care about is coherence and capacity. Right? How can we build a coherent movement? Not in the sense of even like here's the manifesto, here's like the text. It's like here is like the class, right? And how can we build that kind of understanding of ourselves as a movement? And then how from that class can we build our capacity to act and participate in politics? And I'm going to be honest with you right now. I don't think that we have a lot of coherence and a lot of capacity. Like we have a lot of potential, latent capacity, and all those kind of things. And those are way more important political questions for me than like, how can we like, build more awareness around some of the progressive policies that we all support. You know what I'm trying to say? And
100%.
I think that right now, like in 2023, like that is like the challenge of like a socialist or a communist or Marxist. Right now is like trying to how can we get people, I don't know, like here's just pulling back really quick, like everyone always goes, oh, the non-voters, right? Whatever. Like it's the most reasonable thing in the world to not fucking vote, right?
I do it all the time. It's easy.
Like, I get why that doesn't happen, I like on a personal level, I get why, some people make those arguments, but also like, I don't think our role right now should be trying to like fight for
Get out the vote.
For
we should begin a
people,
check,
right?
yeah.
Or even forcing the vote, honestly.
Or even, well, actually, like, I don't want to get on a side thing, but like, I will just
That
say
is electoral.
because people always attack me, and act like I'm this like big electoralist and whatever, and like love the Democratic Party, which I always tell people like fuck that shit. But beyond that, though, that was like the highest articulation of like belief in the system. That, like through some sneaky parliamentary move, we were gonna get the thing.
It was a one quick, one weird trick, and they tried it in the UK too. It was like there's no mass politics left of this country. Everything has been captured by the two parties. You've got a long shot candidate who's going to come from the outside. They're going to become the standard bearer, and they themselves from a bully pulpit, essentially, because we know Bernie wouldn't be able to get anything fucking done from a bully pulpit. They're going to create the movement. They're going to bring us along. They're going to fucking fill the streets. They're going to fill the union hall. He's going to fill the union halls up. And I understand why people were into it, because it's a great idea, right? It's like, oh, we don't have to go through all the tough process of actually like fighting door to door and like shop floor to shop floor to build something. We can have somebody do it for us. We can have somebody take the lead on that. And as it turns out, Bernie is old as dirt. He had his shot 2 times. You're not going to get another shot at that, because both parties now have kind of closed ranks around the possibilities of something like that happening again. So what does it look like without one bizarre trick? What does it look like to actually start, I really like the way you put it, it was coherence and capacity. Like what are the ways in which we can build that without getting distracted by the two-party system tailing one or the other, because a lot of people have
the
gone
new
towards the
ideas
right.
we'll do with the right wing, right?
We'll make the Republican Party is a working class party now, so
which
we'll
is like if the idea with the Democrats is bad, it's like that's even worse.
Way worse.
Just saying, as somebody who like lives in a Republican controlled state, those people are anyway. But like here's the I know we've gone over a little bit, but like I'm fine with it, but here's the thing I'll say on this is that like I talked to a lot of my like labor friends here in Texas, and like one idea that I really loved that Bernie put out, I know he was the first one to come up with it, was the just transition. I think that that's actually key to building up our capacity to like decoupling from fossil fuels. Right, you can't just throw away opportunities for people in certain industries and just say learn to code or whatever fuck, right?
Like literally the best opportunities in those areas.
No, totally.
North Dakota, it's
we
their
can argue
refinery.
about whether or not they're true. We can argue about whether or not they're true, but as like a white trash, like redneck poor kid, like that is when you're growing up, like that is your here, in Texas, like that is like the idea, like that's the thing that I'm going to do, right? And anyways,
and it was a thing that like hundreds of thousands of mostly men, of course, did over the last 15 years or so was like destroy their minds, bodies, and souls by going to work 90 hours a week in some like deserted town in North Dakota, probably somewhere near where
Yeah.
Matt grew up, with like no society whatsoever, just working their asses off so they can make $100,000 in 6 months to be able to afford to like go back and put a down payment on a house or whatever. Like, yes, I agree with you 100%. You can't just say like you can't have that anymore. Those jobs can't
Well, no,
exist.
totally. But even beyond that, right? Here's like the double challenge. Sorry, not to
Yeah,
double
no.
down on this, but like here's the other thing. My friends who do like are in unions or workers, right? They say like, I talk to people, and that you talking about the just transition, right? People who work in those industries, and they're like, yeah, that sounds great. That ain't never gonna happen.
Mhm.
And what I mean, and like the reason that this is a challenge is like so much of like the left, and in particular leftist media, and it's obvious why it does that, is like, how can we make the most convincing argument to get so and so to support this?
Mm.
And I'm going to make like the radical statement that like I don't even think for most of the things that we want to do and see in the near future, we're not even in the place of like how do we convince working people that like this policy is better than that policy. What we have the real challenge is like when you're the guy who shows up and you starts talking to people about these things, how are they not treating you like you're just like crazy and promising these things and like
Yeah.
talking out of your ass, right? And the only way to do that is to develop and show a capacity that like you line up here, right? And like, you can do that in different ways. You can do that by building a political movement that gets results. You can do that by being a comrade and a friend, you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
and being a part of movement so they trust us. You're not just
Yeah.
some random guy talking to them, but like when we talk about these things, how are we moving them from just like, oh, here's a nice like dream I have for something that we could experience
Yeah.
versus like, here's something we could line up and fight for and build and do. Right. And that's where we're at right now. And sorry, just like really quickly, every fucking conversation every debate that we're having on the left right now that I see is just like so far abstracted from like that fundamental reality of like we all agree that like what we need to do is like to get working people to come together and to change the system and to build different kind of politics. But what you're asking people to do is massive. And if
Mhm.
we're not building up the capacity, the confidence, and the trust to do that, then it's just like that, like you don't want to be the asshole who's just like bothering some guy who's getting by. You know what I mean? They're just
Yeah.
like living their life and just like, why are you not like fucking spending Saturdays with me? Which is basically what most leftist organizations are asking people to do. Like, hang out with me a little bit, right?
Which is something that's very necessary in
No,
like an
totally. I'm not
extremely
trying to
atomized society.
degrade
But I
that.
know
I'm
what you
just
mean.
saying
Yeah.
it's like we
Yeah.
need more than just like saying like, hang out with me. We need to like be delivering for people on a serious way. It's like
Yeah.
that's the task that's in front of us. I don't have the answer of how to necessarily do that, but like what frustrates me is I feel like that's the thing that's the furthest away from a lot of conversations that we're having right now.
One thing I would say, and you guys are probably getting close to wrapping up, or are we still going? I couldn't hear you, Matt.
So, sorry, I was muted. We can go. Yeah,
It's
go
your
for it.
call,
No,
Sean.
I'm fine. What time is
Yeah,
it?
we just don't
Oh,
want to keep
I
people.
got laid off last week. I could go for another 15, 20 minutes. Um, no, I mean, like one of the things that you're fighting, and one of the reasons why it seems like it's been and still is premature to try to have like a policy platform or like a platform in general is again this issue of capacity to do something about it. And when you say just transition, working class people are not fucking stupid. If you're of a certain age, and I saw this very explicitly working in construction
Mhm.
in 2014, 2015 with the rise of Donald Trump, the old timers were also promised a just transition in something called the North American Free Trade Agreement of
Mhm.
1994. Was it 94 or 96? One of the two. During the Bill Clinton administration, right? Something that he rammed through against, the left wing of his party, that everybody said millions of jobs were going to be lost, industrial jobs would be lost, and they were right about it. So what they did was they put in a just transition fund where you would get job training and shit like that. They would turn coal miners into coders,
Yeah.
still something that Obama was fucking saying. And of course, it never panned out. And the amount of jobs lost, they were much better paying jobs, and the ones that replaced them were shitty service sector jobs. You don't really need to train to fucking run a cash register or be a home healthcare aide or whatever. So there is a fundamental depoliticization and cynicism in this country towards promises, especially political promises and policies, that either ends up in a situation where people are depoliticized completely. They don't want to fucking hear it. Maybe they think it's great. Medicare for all polls really great. People think it's awesome. But when the chips are down, do they think that anybody could even fucking get that for them? I mean, that's a huge fucking problem. And so if we're not at the situation, if we could talk about these things in a utopian way, like imagine if the government did healthcare in this country, which is as utopian as saying, like, imagine we nationalized the banks and we ran them as a public utility. At this point, those two things are just as likely to fucking happen in this country, right? We could talk about larger goals like that, like what would a sort of reformist program look like that would give, a better life to people in this country. And we probably should. I think we should. But we shouldn't blow smoke up people's asses, and we shouldn't claim to be able to do things that we can't do, and B, if we do push for them, once more puts us in a situation where we have to then enter this world that those people themselves hate, and we fundamentally hate too, of like horse trading bourgeois politics within, of course, the one party where you could hope to even get something like Medicare for all, which is the Democratic Party. You're then stuck in a situation where you've tied your horse to that cart. And as that cart, as it continues to like totter and teeter towards the cliff, do we want to be the fucking in this instance, I guess we're the horse, right? So we're driving the fucking thing off the cliff, but you know what I mean. So like, these are not, what I'm saying isn't like a prescription for what we should do, but I think we all three of us agree, and maybe we're saying in different ways, that we need to be realistic about what can possibly be done, and maybe instead of imagining a shortcut or quick fix like a Bernie Sanders or some other sort of presidential campaign, or even building like grassroots political power on a small level and scaling it up, or a dirty break or whatever it is, maybe there's something more fundamental, which is hanging out with people on Saturday. Maybe there is something like old fashioned, like pulling together the 5 or 10 or 50 people that exist in your town and getting together and like analyzing the world and reading about it and going back to your workplaces and starting to do something about exploitation.
Dude, everyone's so
building
down on
collective
reading
power.
groups, but like so much good shit has come out of that too, right? Like that's I mean, I totally agree. I mean, I don't know.
I'm not arguing that we shouldn't do anything. I'm just saying that what we've been doing hasn't been working, and that if we continue down that route, then just get more tied into a systemic portion of the, like, instead of being counter systemic about going against the prevailing trends of American society and politics and the economy. Once we start making ourselves part of that system, then the indictments of that system rightfully fall back onto our own heads.
I will say, like, I really appreciate having you on the show, Sean. I didn't want to bring up any controversial issues, but as somebody who spent some time doing concrete work, I can agree with your anti-rebar action takes.
Yes, yes, that is the most controversial position I have, which is that rebar as a structure, as a system, needs to be abolished in this country. David has worked with concrete before. He knows why. All of you out there, with changes in the economy, you might be a concrete laborer, a concrete carpenter, and you too will understand. So let's get ahead of the 8 ball here and abolish rebar while we can.
Get rid of it forever.
Yeah.
Man, I mean, like, I would just keep doing this for a while. I mean, I just think it means we might need to do more stuff together in the future. I need you to sometimes show me also how to get better at Victoria 3, because I'm really bad at this.
I would love to. That'd be a lot of fun. I play with Jean Bajalan and Nasai sometimes. We haven't in a bit, but we got to try out the new update and patch. So if you're down, man, I'm down.
Yeah, I'd give it a go. But dude, really appreciate having you on the show, man. It was nice to meet you virtually.
100%. Can I plug something?
Yes,
yeah.
Please plug.
We're here. I'm going to put it in chat because I'm in there. But we actually released, because we talked about the economy and stuff today. We released an episode just tonight. I released it. We usually do Wednesday morning, but we did Thursday night. An episode that we did with that I did with C. Derek Varn on the SVB bank failure and inflation, and sort of trying to pull together a Marxist understanding of what's happening in the economy. And so if you're interested in that, I put the link in the chat to our Patreon 3-hour episode that you can check out.
There you go.
But there's also an hour's worth of free stuff. So you can find our free content on rss.com/theantifada. So check it out, man. If the watchers and listeners or whatever out there are into this sort of stuff, we have a great big series about critique of political economy and all sorts of content. So that's my plug.
Oh yeah, we'll
Awesome.
put that in the show notes too, the link to that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Really, man, a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
Let's do it again this summer, Sean.
I would love to. You guys are great to talk to. I had a great time.